please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Do I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Light. Second?
I'll second.
Oh, thank you, Tommy. All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. We have adoption of the minutes from January 18th. Do I have a motion to adopt those minutes?
I have one minor edit at the top of page 3. The word by is missing. We reviewed comments submitted by a concerned public citizen. But other than that monumental contribution, I have no other comments. And I would move to approve the minutes as.
And a second, anyone?
I second.
Thank you, Steph. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Thank you. That takes us to the first item of the evening, the public.
I'm sorry. I just thought about it now that I'm seeing the agenda. Is it too late?
To amend the agenda?
Yeah.
It's never too late to amend the agenda.
Well, I think I'd like to move the public comment ahead before the public hearing, because I think we closed the public hearing on her application, and in case there was anybody that wanted to say something, could say it before we discussed it instead of after we already made our decision.
Are there any,
I'll second that motion.
are there any rules we need to worry about in making that change? All right. So the motion, as I understand it, is to amend the agenda to move item E1, the public comment, to this point in the agenda before D1, public hearing.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, all of those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. And with that, that will take us to the public comment period. Anyone who wishes to speak on any number of topics, including those on and off the agenda, are welcome to do so at this time. We ask that you approach the podium and identify yourself by name and the district in which you live. And public comment is now open.
I think that probably includes the special exception permit.
You can, or you can hold your comments until that public hearing.
Oh, either one. I'll speak now, I'm here. Gentle ladies and gentlemen, good to see you again. I'm here to speak in favor of and support of the special exception permit applied for by Glen Farm LLC. We're a not so nearby, I guess you would call us contiguous rather than adjacent, because we're about a mile away as the crow flies. So the Wardinskis have been great neighbors for a dozen years. We've seen them once every 4 or 5 years, perhaps, not often, essentially invisible to us, and their impact has been equally so. They've done nice things with their property, and the neighbors are happy to have them as neighbors. And should there be any question in the permit, I know that some of your permits are granted for limited time periods. Perhaps that refers to rental properties or something, but in their case, I would ask that it be considered granted in perpetuity if it's granted. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you just state your name and the district in which you live for the record? That's okay, just for our minutes, please.
I have to, I'm in Piedmont, I think now.
I think you are
I think
too.
we were gerrymandered into Piedmont a few years ago. Anyway, Barney O'Mara, Acquaintance Road. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? All right, if no one else wishes to speak, I'll go ahead and declare the public hearing closed, or the public comment closed, and that takes us to the first item of the evening, special use permit 22-10-01, the Kept Key Tourist Home. Ms. Summers, if you could introduce that for us again, please.
Thank you, Mrs. Chairman. This item was tabled at our last meeting. The applicant wishes to operate a tourist home, which is a newly constructed house. It is a 3-bedroom home. VDOT does not have any objections. The health department would recommend it be the occupancy limited to 4 people. The applicant is present tonight to answer any questions. And this is at 118 Highland Way in Chester Gap.
Thank you, Ms. Summers. And we open and close this public hearing at the previous meeting, correct? All right, and Courtney Kepke, is that the correct pronunciation of your name? Thank you. This would be your opportunity to speak if there was anything you wanted to add.
Sure. Not much to add. I think my application has a lot of information in it. I am a resident of Alexandria, so bought this home to have a place. I'm one of the many, I'm sure, that had the remote work era, so I want a place kind of close to home where I can come and then rent it out when I'm not there. I do have one other property that I use as a short-term rental in Florida. So I am a seasoned operator. I have a lot of systems and processes in place to reduce the risk of any issues with parties, anything like that. So I have noise monitoring, video monitoring, etc., and really focus on screening people to ensure that, you know, my home is taken care of, as well as minimal impact to the residents of the area.
Thank you. Mr. Schulen, I know this is in your district. Did you want to bring up this discussion this evening? I know you had some questions.
I spoke with Ms. Kepke earlier, and my concerns are still the same, just about Chester Gap and Rappahannock Lakes, that these are subdivisions. I don't particularly like them there because that's where people are raising their families and stuff. However, we don't really have any ordinances that prohibit it in these specific areas. And with that taken into account, you know, trying to nitpick and find, you know, hope that the road's too narrow or hope a neighbor would come in to complain. But that's not happening, you know. Her property, although it's in the middle of Chester Gap, she essentially doesn't have the neighbors. There's people behind her that are closest. Any new homes nearby will already be aware that there's an Airbnb being operated there. Asked her about the trash, because we have a problem up there sometimes with bears and other critters. And she's thought about that, and one of her considerations is possibly having somebody who's turning the place out, just take the trash with them, so it's not sitting out there. And I think that would probably be the biggest problem with your neighbors anyways. Noise is not a problem, so. The road is very narrow, but like I said, you know, if we got some snow this winter, it'd be probably twice as wide, so. I have no other questions, and.
I have one question, which is, I know you signed it as the manager of VAVR LLC.
That's correct.
Is that your company?
Yes, it is.
So are you the sole?
Yes, I am. It's a sole proprietorship.
So you're not representing?
No, I'm not.
I guess my only question is, you know, with you living in Alexandria but renting out here, what if you're monitoring and something does happen? What will be, how will you be able to respond?
Absolutely. My other property that I have is in Florida, so that's even farther distance away, of course. But really what I focus on is having my cleaner be boots on the ground, as well as having a good handyman boots on the ground. I already have people that I've worked with on the handyman side, still in the process of getting a cleaner, but really rely on those people to help be those boots on the ground if there's anything that happens. But primarily, I mean, especially with me being so close, I feel like that is a good benefit as a secondary backup, of course, or maybe third backup after both those people. So that's my plan for that.
Okay, that's great. I just, that's one thing that always comes up is quality of life for people that live nearby.
Absolutely.
That if something does happen, and for the safety of the folks that are renting too, of course.
And I mentioned to Mr. Schulen before the meeting started that I have spoken to the neighbors. I have shared my contact information with the people that I spoke to as well. So we'll be able to have that open line of communication so that if there is any impact, you know, they can make me aware and I can address it as soon as possible.
That's great.
Do you actually envision spending time there?
Yeah, I actually have been there for the last few months. So
Okay.
it was a mistake on my part, but I was called away for a business trip at the last hearing. But that's really that 1 or 2 week period was one of the only times I haven't been there since I closed on it.
Thank you. Mr. Sisk, did you have anything?
No, Mr. Schulen addressed and you said you talked to your neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
And the only other question, I mean, you have ample I didn't get the opportunity to look, I was gone this weekend, but you have ample parking there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. I think about 3 or 4 cars can fit in the driveway, so I don't believe that should be an issue.
There's actually quite a bit of land around your house.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else, Steph?
That's it, thank you.
Mr. Atkins?
How close is the nearest neighbor?
On Highland Way, I believe the nearest neighbor, there's one empty lot between us, and I have spoken to that neighbor. On the other side, I don't even know how many empty lots between me and the next over person. I think it's at least probably 4 lots. And then across the way, some of the people across the street on Highland Way own both properties between Highland and Skyway. So they're closer set to Skyway than Highland. The closest, as Mr. Schillen mentioned, is one road over on Blue Ridge. I think they're kind of on a couple lots, so they're kitty corner from my back porch. So that's the closest neighbor probably.
Well, that sounds good, because my concern about putting tourist homes and subdivisions when you have neighbors on top, real close to one another.
Mm-hmm.
And I've expressed that concern with Rappahannock Lakes, and doesn't always go the way that I express my concerns about it, but I have no problem with what you have. I think it would probably be a good fit.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Light?
Nothing more.
Mr. Hunter?
Your anticipated clientele, are you anticipating a normal visitor through the system that's going to drive up there? Reason I asked that, several years ago, we had an applicant that came in, and they were going to cater to the Appalachian Trail, where people came off the trail, and the distance from your house to the trail is probably, what, quarter mile?
Yeah, I think that's about right.
So were you going to cater to them or just to whoever?
I wasn't necessarily only planning to cater to people coming from the Appalachian Trail. I think that's definitely a draw of this area, is the proximity, of course, to the Appalachian Trail, as well as Shenandoah National Park. So I think really in my mind, that's some of your primary drivers to the area that I would be looking at.
So you're going to be looking at hikers that
I think
simply walk
primarily,
off?
yeah, absolutely.
Primarily.
I don't know that I could really control who, of course, rents it 100%, but I think that's really the draw. I mean, that's what I envision when you list the property. Those are the proximity to both those places is really what I think the draw of the area is.
Another question, just curious. Your drain field system, is that a conventional? Is it an alternate system such as a peat moss, or what is that?
I'm not 100% sure. I believe it's conventional, but I couldn't say 100% unless I were to look back at my records on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Henry. Do we have a motion on this application?
I move that we move this application to the BCA with approval.
I'll second that.
Okay, that's a motion to move this application along to the BZA with a recommendation for approval. Are we including the staff recommended conditions of a maximum of 4 people, no food service,
Yes.
and terminates upon sale of the transfer of the property?
And no glitter.
It's funny that you say that because I do typically have that in my house rules.
Were there other conditions you wanted, Mr. Schuler?
No, ma'am.
Okay. All right, so with that motion and second, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Your next stop will be the BZA.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good night. Next item on the agenda is the special exception 23-01-01 Glen Farm LLC, more than one dwelling per tractor parcel, for a public hearing this evening. Ms. Summers, would you be able to open that for us, please?
Thank you. Glen Farm LLC has requested a special exception permit for a second dwelling on property located at 461 Whitens Road in Woodville pursuant to 170-36A. The property is 577 acres in size, and it is zoned conservation and agricultural. The proposed second dwelling is a pool house that's currently under construction. The initial plans for the pool house structure included 4 bedrooms and a bathroom. The applicant would now like to add a kitchen and within the pool house under construction, making it another dwelling unit. It is proposed that the second dwelling would be used solely for the temporary use of guests of the owners. VDOT had no objections to the request, nor did the health department. And the applicants and their attorney, Mr. Brown, are present for any questions.
Thank you. Would y'all like to add anything at this time? Excuse me.
Sure. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure. We've been by here a million times. My wife and I have never come in, so it's a beautiful, beautiful space here. So as Barney O'Mara said, we bought the property from Eldon Farms almost 12 years ago. And, at that time, there was nothing on it. And so we've been kind of in the process of improving it over the 12 years. When we looked originally at buying here, we had spent almost 3 years looking all over, kind of this part of Virginia in many different counties. And we fell in love with Rappahannock County. So I'm sure the same reasons you, for what it is and what, the special place it is. And it's just been that and more over the 12 years. We've kind of loved it every day, that we come here. And, our goal has been to, be a good neighbor to the O'Maras, the Dodges, and the couple other neighbors that we have, to be a good citizen of Rappahannock County and to be a good steward of the land. We love the outdoors and we love having the property there. So that's our goal. It's a long story, but, the original house only has 1 bedroom. And so that was kind of going to be the guest house back in the day. And at that time, almost 12 years ago, the rules were very different here, and there weren't the rules you have now for the auxiliary dwelling unit. And then even when we started the pool house, the rules were different. And so the approval we got back then kind of fit what we were trying to do then. And then the pandemic hit and, new rules were passed by the county and, just everything took longer to go. So this construction project's been going on a long time. Our contractor lives here in Rappahannock County. It's Greg Foster out of Flint Hill. Our farmer is Philip Herzig out of Woodville. We've always tried to use as many people, within the county, again, trying to go back to the, good neighbor and good citizen of the county. And so, really what we have 3 adult sons. They're all in their 20s. Hopefully, someday they'll, be married and have children also. And so the point of the pool house is really just to have room for them to come. So how we envision it is definitely as one kind of house. Yes, they're in 2 buildings, but as I said, the first building only has 1 bedroom that my wife and I use. So the goal was to have more bedrooms, so when, our kids come, and hopefully in the future their families, there will be space for them to come. So we live in Centerville, so we're not here full-time. As Marty said, we're kind of quiet. When we come down here, we like to be quiet. So that's kind of the purpose, but I'm available to answer any other questions you might have about our petition.
Thank you. We'll probably hold our questions for just a few more minutes.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
At that point, if you all have spoken and we've had it queued up, we'll go ahead and open up the public hearing. This time, anyone that wishes to speak on this particular item, the special exception, certainly welcome to do so. I don't think we have anybody here that hasn't already spoken. Anita? All right, and if no one wishes to speak, I'll go ahead and declare the public hearing closed. This item is in the Piedmont District. Mr. Sis, would you like to speak on this first?
Actually, I'd like to go last if I could.
Okay. Is there anyone that would like to lead off this discussion?
I'll do it.
Thank you, Mr. Henry.
This is a no-brainer, 577 acres, a kitchen and a pool house. It's no other improvements other than the main house on it. It's plenty of room, plenty of acreage, nobody lives around, laying into, Chuck Ackery's on a couple sides of it. It's a no-brainer, there's no issues here. As far as I'm concerned, I just think we should pass it on to the Board of Supervisors.
Thank you, Mr. Henry. Mr. Light?
I tend to agree. I guess just, is there, I've been looking, I'm sorry if it was in here, is there any kind of covenant, an easement or anything on the property that restricts it, or?
There is not.
There's none, okay. Yeah, I tend to agree. It's certainly minimal impact. I appreciate the additional clarity in your remarks.
And I would just echo those comments of my peers. You know, when I had a site visit, it certainly has end of the road privacy. It's hard to see how it would impact anyone negatively. A recommendation for approval would certainly fall in line with what we have done previously on the application of Bob Ryan last fall, when they applied for a similar use for the same sort of purpose for family members to use. So, I mean, it certainly seemed like a reasonable recommendation for approval for me too. Mr. Atkins?
I would concur with those comments. The only thing that I would add is, I certainly appreciate their concern that they do want to bring family into the county and live. And their sons, their children, maybe grandchildren and so forth. So I think that's a big plus. When people come to the county, then they also want to bring their family into the county.
Our children love it here. I mean, they absolutely did, been coming here for 12 years. They love this county.
Like Mr. Henry said, you certainly got plenty of space. It's not,
Yes.
it's not an issue about you being on top of one another.
No.
So.
All right, Ms. Ritter?
No, I can't see any problem at all. Plenty of space, clearly a need, one bedroom and 3 kids. I can see that would be really critical to have another place. So, yeah, and thank you for the invitation, by the way.
Oh, no.
I had my grandchildren, so I thought I wouldn't drag them over there. Thank you.
Mr. Schillen?
Well, I thank you for just not going ahead and putting in a kitchen anyway without going through the proper procedures. I mean, this thing's almost in the dead center of the property. I mean, this is a no-brainer. Thank you for not doing it under the table and behind the backs.
Mr. Sisk?
Normally, honestly, I'm a kind of, whatever the book says, gotta go by. And where it says, well, normally this would not be allowed, I found that I wanted to kind of see what everybody else thought, but I was like, 577 acres, if you can't, make an exception, if that doesn't fall into that exception, then I don't know what really would. So, no, it was a nice package. I agree. I mean, in this instance, I think it's, certainly that special exemption is, or as we could forward it to the BZA for approval. I have no issues with it at all.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right. Well, it sounds like we're all of one mind. Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
All right. And judging from your remarks, it sounds like it's a motion to forward this
Yes,
matter
to
to the
forward,
Board of
yes.
Supervisors
Yes.
with a recommendation for approval.
I second.
Thank you, Ms. Ritter. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. That means your next stop is the Board of Supervisors. Thanks so much for coming tonight
Thank
and
you so much.
for inviting us to your home.
You want to go when it's done.
Yeah. Shorts, and new shirts.
This kept your all wrapped up too, if you want to leave. All right, that takes us into, we have no new business, we've already done public comment, and so that takes us into the draft sign ordinance amendment. I know at our last meeting, we had voted to send this on to the Berkeley group. Subsequent to that, Mr. Curry and the county attorney did review this and just make some small tweaks before we send it on to the Berkeley group. So Mr. Curry was very kind to join us tonight and either walk us through questions or answer any questions we may have about the small changes that they made.
Absolutely. If you'd like, I can run through line by line the changes. There aren't that many. Do you all have the printout before you, or are you relying on?
Some of both.
Some of both, all right. It's a little bit small on the screen. But on this first section here, on line 14, we just inserted the word may, and that's that qualifying statement that the board also finds that signs take up space and may obstruct views, distract motorists, displace alternative uses of land, and pose other problems that legitimately call for regulation, and that the unregulated erection and display of signs may constitute a public nuisance. So just insert may. It's not a guarantee. And I think it carries the same effect, but would not be thrown out by somebody because it always would. Line 29, just a little bit further down, it's just a correction that sentence was referring to the regulations in this section relating to the entire article for signs. Just a quick cleanup there. The second page on lines 66 and 77, you see highlight there. That's just a reminder that there's still a staff intent to develop a parallel graphic to help show what is intended by this area of the sign, whether it be for a 2D or 3D sign, and so we intend to develop a little schematic to add a little color to those words.
Okay.
And help for interpretation. Next page, line 100, the definition of directional sign. That section discussed a sign that is erected or displayed. We felt that was redundant, and ultimately displayed drove the meeting, and then we wouldn't have somebody arguing whether they're what it meant by erected. The fact of the matter is, if it's displayed, and we talk about the definition of signs, that you can see it from a public right-of-way or nearby property, so displayed is the critical term there. Moving on to the next page, we're down at line 142. We deleted the tail end of this sentence. For the purposes of this definition, this is the definition of signs, and this is the section that seeks to pull out the art type things. For the purposes of this definition, a work of art is any item expressing creative skill or imagination in visual form, such as a painting or sculpture, which is intended to beautify or provide an aesthetic influence to a public area or area which is visible from the public realm, and which in no way identify or specifically relate to a product or service, period, as opposed to service on the premises. So we don't want to allow an advertisement off premise. And that Wagmore Dogs case that came up where there was a mural and they had a little cartoon dog that happened to be their trademark. That wouldn't be allowed whether it's on the side of the business or it was down the street. And so that was the point there.
Okay.
Moving on to the next page. Line 192 to 194. This is a more legislative change, and so this is a temporary signs not exceeding an aggregate of 32 square feet located in a lot of parcel that's for sale or lease, generally going to be a real estate sign, but you could have anything you want. Provided they meet other requirements, such signs shall be removed within 30 days of settlement. So 7 was, we felt, was very short. Many times our realtors want to brag that they sold the property. We thought it would, 30 days was more reasonable. That is certainly subject to debate. That next paragraph regarding temporary signs that has active construction activity, it's just the changing of a word. requiring a building permit with active period coterminous with the valid term of the applicable building permit as opposed to coexisting. Next page, line 230. Art and I discussed this section about liability. This was not inserted by the Planning Commission. This is, goes back in time with the sign ordinance, probably came in '86 and came from Fairfax or whoever. To our knowledge, the requirements of this section have never been applied. And it says that no permit shall be granted, no permit shall be valid unless and until the applicant shall have signed an agreement to indemnify and hold Rappahannock County harmless from any and all loss or damage to property, injury, or death. It seemed odd that this would be in there at all, and that Rappahannock wouldn't have any liability anyway for allowing a permit, and we have never done it. So if we don't do it, and it doesn't really seem legally valid, then why even have it in there? Rather than renumbering everything, we just stick a reserved in there. Skipping down a couple lines, again, similar to the first page, substituting article for chapter. That's speaking to, yeah. Okay. Next page, line 257. To provide context relative to this section, this is a section that is older, but it previously referred to when this article was adopted, referring to 1986. Now that this is being readopted, we want to avoid confusion. What exactly is it talking about? And so we inserted when the article was previously originally adopted, December 1, 1986. Line 284 is just a typo, or for of, and the definition of pay bail. A few pages down to line 379. Waiver and enlargement. This is a generally new section to provide some flexibility. It said any size limitations in this article could be waived, or otherwise enlarged by a special exception. So that opportunity is expanded to say any size, number, or other limitations. So if you don't like the rules here, you can go to the board and request a special exception because your special circumstances, the geometry of your site or whatever plays against you relative to the signage, and you can go to the special exception and explain to the board why, the Planning Commission and the board, why your site is different and why different rules should apply to you. Not only for size, but number and any of the other requirements of the ordinance. A couple lines down, 389. This came, if you remember, Mr. Henry, I think, brought up this conversation about all the little no hunting or signs that are along a parcel. We didn't want those to count or someone have to get a permit for them. The group included non-commercial signage no larger than 1 square foot in area, as trying to put a bucket around those. To drive directly to the point, Art and I looked into this, and so signage set forth in Virginia Code Section 18.2.134 regarding posting land prohibiting hunting, fishing, and trapping is specifically what you were talking about, rather than allowing somebody to put up a whole bunch of 1 square foot signs of smiley faces or whatever, I don't know, or I hate my neighbor or something. Now it's limited to those particular signs.
And that's
We're on
not,
trespassing.
that's not a problem with the First Amendment?
I don't think so. You mean allowing these signs and not other signs?
Well, because you have to read them, didn't know whether they're allowed.
We just say you don't need a permit, so.
Yeah. Okay, great. I mean, I would never problem with it.
So my view on that sort of thing is, I would regulate it this way to keep it tight. If somebody in 5 years wants to sue you because they want to put a different kind of sign up there,
Good.
take care of it then, rather than open the floodgates.
What about trespassing, is that?
That's a good point. We could reference a separate code section relative to trespassing if the group thought it was necessary. And of course, for the hunting, fishing, and trapping, there are regulations how frequently you have to post, et cetera, whereas in no trespassing, that's more, you could do what you think is necessary. Those would just not be necessarily exempt. But that is something that could be considered, and maybe will come up during public hearings.
I'm sorry, those no trespassing signs are not otherwise addressed here,
Not in this sense that they are exempt from the total sign area permitted on the parcel.
So,
They would be considered probably temporary signs. They wouldn't require a permit because they're under 2 square feet. But technically, they would add up to your total allotted sign for your parcel.
and you're saying there is a similar code section that refers to those, it could be inserted in this section if we so.
I'm conjecturing that there is, but there's bound to be a trespassing code in some sort of land posted for trespassing with a certain sign, but I don't have that information.
I mean, it does seem odd to refer to these signs and not those signs. So I personally feel like if there is such a section, that it would be sensible to add it here, but maybe I'm overlooking something.
Yeah, I think we, the community, want to allow people to post their lands for hunting, trapping, fishing, and follow the rules of the state code on how frequently you have to do that. We definitely want to do that. Whether you want to encourage the proliferation of no trespassing signs all up and down a piece of property or not, I don't know.
I think you should. I agree with Mr. White, if there is a code section for no trespassing, that we should include that too, because, if you have property, you're close to the park, people take shortcuts into the park. We have that unique situation that a lot of counties don't have. And some people in the county think they have a right to hike any place, and that's come up before. And I think, actually hunting and fishing, trapping almost doesn't exist. Hunting's on the downturn. There's not that many places to fish in Rappahannock, so I think you could just have general trespassing as more of a problem than all 3 of these combined.
Yeah, I know of folks that have, a pond on their property and they've come home to families picnicking on their front yard. So, it's nice to have such a picturesque place, but not really what you want to come home to. So I would want to add it too.
So if we could put in a light amendment, that would be really good.
So I've noted that line 3-9.
If people trespassing, you have to get back into the river. Hike back to the 1 acre.
So is that general consensus? Sounds like.
Everybody, that's a good idea. Okay.
Let's see. And the last change is all the way on the last page, line 48788. This was a little bit convoluted as written. Originally, you recall that this body already deleted the last sentence, which talked about you automatically get commercial size signs in a non-commercial area if you get an SUP or SE, unless the SE or SUP says you don't. So you took that out and said, well, you got to ask for a bigger sign, right? But it was a little bit confusing, so now it just makes it more clear that no other type of sign illumination shall be allowed except by special exception. You want a different type of lighting other than external lights with directed light onto a sign, then you need to ask for it and explain why your condition is different, whether it's an internally lit sign through a plastic lens or an internal LED sign like we've seen in some places. You got to ask for it through a special exception. Always going to go to the board and not going to go to the BCA. If that use happened to be an SUP, then it would the way it was written before, you would ask the BZA for the special lights. If that use happened to be an SE, you would ask the BOS for the special lights. Now you just ask the BOS for the special lights. And that's all the recommended changes.
Well, what does everybody think about these changes? Any concerns?
No, I appreciate that, I think every time this sits for a while and you pick it up and read it again, it's likely that you will find these opportunities. So, to me, these are all sensible. So I'm glad to hear from my colleagues, but I'd be happy to move this forward as we had previously attempted to move the last draft.
All right, thank you, Mr. White, for making that motion. And do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Atkins. I think at the last meeting, we had recommended that we send that draft to the Berkeley group and that they particularly keep an eye on the content and consistency in their recommendations back to us. And so we're now moving along this version with a recommendation for that same content review.
I think reading here, hasn't the board already done that?
The Board of Supervisors basically asked, by consensus, asked Art and I to go through it with a fine-tooth comb and then send it to the Berkeley group. And then a parallel path, I think you guys said, send it to the Berkeley group. So you're of like mind. And before, this was just presented to the board last week. So before just pushing it off to the Berkeley group, it made sense due to timing, bring it back here to make sure you didn't have any insightful comments, which you did. And now we'll push it on with that. And I think everything lines up together.
We got a little out of sync, but we're syncing back up now. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. That takes us on to the Berkeley Group zoning ordinance update. Not sure if Ms. Summers or Mr. Curry, which one of you wants to lead this discussion?
I can lead that. Hopefully, planning commissioners have had an opportunity to review the documentation that was provided with BoardDocs. There's a roadmap memo that Berkeley Group prepared. Berkeley Group was asked to look at the zoning ordinance and devise a scope to help us move forward with changes that would, one, help with citizen understanding of the ordinance, putting things in a better order and organization, and two, make sure that our processes and procedures are as clearly defined and defensible as possible. And so in conveying that ask to the Berkeley Group, they've developed this memorandum, which is basically a scope proposal to go through a fairly lengthy process to reorganize the zoning ordinance and review the processes and procedures, and then get into potentially changing district standards dependent on community engagement. If you've read their information, they strongly recommend community engagement in ways that doesn't rely on people coming into this room, which sometimes can be a barrier, and trying to get to people where they are. So that's important anytime you're potentially making large or considerable changes to a zoning ordinance or comprehensive plans and things like that. So this is opportunity. The Board of Supervisors has provided adequate funding in the current fiscal year. If it's not spent this year, it can be carried forward to next year to probably do all, if not most, of this work. And the board, I believe, my understanding is they would like the Planning Commission to dig into this scope opportunity and work with the Berkeley Group to nail down what it is we want them to do, help us do. Does this document reflect your interests in trying to improve the zoning ordinance here? Does it not? If it doesn't, then how do we get towards a document that does? And just to wrap up, the Berkeley Group asked me if they should be saving time in their schedule for us, and I said, yes, save time. We want your time. They're just not sure what they're doing, other than reviewing sign ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. I just have to say, as a member of the Board of Supervisors, I think this is really important work. We've set aside money to do it. I appreciate that you all are on board for the task. It is a big lift. And, I'm anxious to hear what you all have to say about the proposal. And I certainly appreciate that the Berkeley Group is willing to help us and keep us on track and identify the really unique things about Rappahannock County that make us such a special place and make sure they're inherent down to the details in our zoning ordinance. So I'd like to hear from anybody that has any thoughts
Mr.
about
Curry,
the proposal.
Mr. Curry, I thought you and Mr. Goff were gonna try to do.
Yeah, so we have started the use table and basically the SESUP discussion that branched off into having the Berkeley Group prepare this.
Yeah.
But our input would drive into this process.
Okay.
Or our output would drive into this process.
So they wouldn't be starting without input from your office?
I think the way we explained it to the Berkeley Group is that county staff, between myself, Michelle, and Art, were limited in number and capacity, and that we really need a resource that is available to provide that extra capacity to get stuff done. And so the idea is to be teamwork between staff and consultant to get all this done, with us being along the way, but having them as a real engine to get stuff done.
Yeah. Well, there are two ways. I mean, they could make the proposal and then it could go through staff and then to us.
Yeah, well, we're always hesitant. While we think the Berkeley Group understands what Rappahannock is and means, we want to make sure we're leading and they're biting off chunks that we hand to them rather than them leading. If that makes sense.
You know, the ordinance has created a Rappahannock that we live in today. And, the zoning part of it, the one house for 25 acres, the density that we're looking at, that's made Rappahannock what it is today, and we understand that. What concerns me is that, we spent years and years doing this last comp plan. And that was like 20 pages, 30 pages, whatever that was. And the potential complexity of doing public hearings, doing focus groups, determining what needs to be changed and how it will affect various segments of the county and design standards. This is big. I mean, that's...
You're absolutely right.
And, I mean, it depends how radical you get. This could take 3 years.
Well, they're suggesting that through 2024, and certainly could take longer. The organization the work could be done in a way that largely carries forward the same requirements we have now, albeit hopefully conveys them in a more clear way with better understanding of how you are to work through various processes. And then once you do that, they're more defensible for the county and for the applicant, should we end up in court.
Yeah, I think I do think that our ordinance could be a lot more user-friendly, but the idea that they would change the content of or the sort of structure of how we design the county, if you will, it could be a little troubling.
Yeah, well, so they're not, certainly, nobody's empowered to do that other than the board of supervisors, right? After public hearings. But when they came and explained their diagnostic report to the bodies, they discussed the organizational layout of ordinance and how you could better convey that information. So you
Yeah,
have
I think they're
people,
tabled.
you don't want people applying for a permit that they have no chance of getting. And so people should really better understand, what am I allowed to do? And if you don't look at the ordinance very often, your eyes glaze over, you have no idea, you're just
Right,
asking
even
Michelle,
if you do.
can I do this on this parcel? And, you know, she wants to be very careful not to be their designer, right? And well, if you did A, B, and C, you might be able to do this, that's really not our place. But if we could get the documents to be a little more clear, then they could determine that.
Yeah, no, I'm all for that, I think it's a great idea.
Okay. Are you?
Go ahead, Mr. Lake.
I have some serious concerns about this, frankly. And it's not that it will take too long, but that it will be too short. And it would provide a venue for loud, organized voices to overwhelm our process. When I see things like community survey, and I mean, listening sessions, who's listening? Who's writing the survey? How does this get done? I don't see any way of doing this without bringing a huge influence of the way other areas do this that are not Rappahannock. And, you know, I think to jump from, we need help presenting our stuff in a more user-friendly way, to opening this whole thing up and having it driven by consultants who really don't know the area, would be a very big mistake. That's all I have to say on the matter.
Well, that goes sort of to my substance versus procedure. So, the question is, how do you tease out what exactly we want from the Berkeley group? And it, I mean, I for one, like, I think even the table of contents is an improvement, and much more user-friendly. Who's the focus group idea? You know, I was wondering who's in the focus group.
I mean, that's problematic sometimes.
This is just a process that is made for a bigger community with bigger activities. And, you know, for us to, when we went through this with the diagnostic report, we had a session, this was presented to us in like a very short period of time. We had to kind of react very quickly. We will be overwhelmed by this process. And I think that, you know, means we will have limited ability to manage where this goes. And that is a big concern of mine. And I think we do need to try to bound them in terms of process and presentation, and dial this in a little bit with respect to this kind of open-ended process to talk about ways the whole thing could be changed substantively. I think that's, I'm a little concerned about that.
I think when you go down this road, the primary premise that we're gonna have to hold on to is that if it's not broke, let's don't fix it. And then move off of that to, if something needs adjustment, then we look at that. And I think, you know, I think back to when the zoning ordinance was created here in Rappahannock County. I think that was a big leap, going from free range to a controlled situation in the county with regulations on all land uses. So, I mean, that was a big step then. I think we have to maintain a degree of independence and objectivity in what we hear from people and what we hear from groups, and do what is correct for an orderly Rappahannock County and not get hijacked down in the rabbit hole that's being controlled by somebody else. But the primary premise is that if it's not broke, we shouldn't mess with it too much. And I think there are issues with it, that it can be better, it can be more user-friendly. Does it need to be completely reborn? No. And I think we have to look at it that way.
Thank you, Mr. Henry. Does anyone mind if I let
No,
Anita
it'd be
speak?
great.
She's got her hand up. Yes, Anita.
Madam Chair, thank you. I lived through the beginnings, the middle, and the end of the comprehensive plan. Back when the board went, the planning commission went around to all the different districts. And it was Phil Irwin, my husband, and myself, and one or two people that showed up. Actually, truthfully, I hope in this process, maybe 3 or 4 people will show up. That maybe the business groups or some of the farming community or somebody like that will come as a group or as individuals and speak to you about what they think does or doesn't work with this. But I don't think you're going to have focus groups. I know somebody who worked for Department of Ag and helped create labels on the back of everything you buy at a grocery store. That's what he did for 20 years of his life, was put that together the first time and the second time. And he did focus groups and interest groups or whatever you want to call them all the time. We aren't quite that complicated. And I think Berkeley group's got to be told, we aren't that complicated. If you go around to the districts, if you ask people in certain kinds of communities to come and say their piece if they want, great. But I don't think it's going to be as scary or as complicated or as difficult, at least from the public, as you all are maybe worried about. I might be surprised, but I haven't been surprised about turnout so far in this world here. And it's quite different than being in Fairfax. Between 1 million people, you can usually get 20 that are mad about something. But it's a little harder here.
Thank
So
you.
thank you very much.
Yes, Mr. Atkins.
I don't think we need a complete overhaul to start with. I do think that, like any other organization or any other program that we run, we can use some fine tuning. And I am all for the fine tuning, but I am not throwing the baby out with the washboard. I am not for that. But I do think that we can use some fine tuning. And I guess with that, how do we have the input that we want given to the Berkeley group, what we want them to actually do? Not just turn it over to them carte blanche, that they go looking to, to dig in go down every rabbit hole that we don't need them chasing down rabbit holes. We do have a good ordinance. Yes, they can use some fine tuning. So I'm all for the fine tuning, but I'm not for turning them loose to just overhaul this whole thing.
Thank you.
Good, so, I think there are two things that we could benefit from, well, probably more than that, from the Berkeley group. I do think that finding inconsistencies in our current ordinance, since it's been changed over time, and also, again, to make it a little more user-friendly, but maybe the way to go about it would be for them to work on a smaller piece and bring that back, and then we can have a public hearing. I mean, it does seem like people come to public hearings, and if it's pieces, or they guess it's going to be tough because they're going to want to reorganize the whole thing. I'm trying to think it through.
Much of phase one
Yeah, that's
is really would not necessarily change standards, it would
Right.
change the layout and processes, which obviously you want the public to review through public hearings, but it's not as much of a public engagement input session of, John Hughes, citizen, do you like an arrangement where this section becomes before that section, or they don't care, right? That's more for you and the board to think about. But if the use matrix is changing relative to what is allowed where and what's not allowed where, that gets into a much bigger conversation. So I think you could go through a process where you do some reorganization and not make changes to what you can do where. And what requires is permitted by right, what's allowed with a special use or special exception. You might collapse them into one category as has been discussed here.
No,
Then you could avoid some of the more subjective stuff and leave that for future consideration. Really just look at it as a procedural cleanup as your first step.
Well, what about, Michelle, you have to work with this all the time. What would you like?
Yeah, I mean, that's my point was, you know, I think our county administrator and our zoning administrator, they know where the complaints are coming from. They know where the shortfalls are and where the shortcomings are. You know, what makes her job easier, makes an applicant's process easier.
Well, I mean, you guys have to confront the flaws and deal with it. So, it seems to me your input would be critical.
I've said before, my biggest concern is that our process and procedure for
Yeah.
rezonings, special permits, variances, all of that is reviewed and very carefully and set to best practice as allowed by the state, so that when we find ourselves in those situations, that you are guided as well as you can be, and so is the applicant, and the outcome is protectable as possible.
I totally agree.
But this, if you look at Article 6 use matrix, a complete overhaul of the current uses and the permissions throughout the county. This is not limited to what the zoning administrator finds confusing. This is opening up this entire thing to changes in our fundamental policy and our zoning restriction that has made this county what it is. This is to open this up in this way and turn over this much of this exercise to these folks would undoubtedly take us well beyond user-friendliness and making the document reorganized. It's not at all what is reflected in this plan. So I think we definitely need to differentiate policy, which our supervisors are elected and we are appointed to carry forward, and a process that just, for reasons of well-intentioned public engagement, put us in a course where we are going to be, we don't know what we're going to get, and I think we just need to have a measured, managed approach and recognize the bounds that we are trying to take on here with this exercise.
Yeah, I think that, that portion and the next one, the use standard. I mean, if you exclude those, everything seems to be kind of an organizational type of, shuffling things around and cleaning stuff up. That, I agree with you, Mr. White. That's a little too far.
So some of the issues you have right now, uses permitted by right have no use standards, unless there might be a mention in a definition. Uses that are permitted through a special use or special exception, you have a whole article on these many tourist homes, for example, right? If you're out, not on a state road, it's gotta be type 2, and you can only have this many people there and all that stuff. But if you happen to be in an area that allows a tourist home by right, no rules, do whatever you want. And one of the things the Berkeley group said, that's kind of silly. Those sort of rules can be placed as use standards that would apply to a use that's permitted by right or by special use, special exception. But right now, that whole article just doesn't apply to uses permitted by right.
Well, that seems like a tweak more than an overhaul, though.
I think there's a wording issue there with the way it was presented by the Berkeley group. And the qualifying sentence by this step will address many of the pressing concerns from both the Board of Supervisors and Planning Commission. And I don't like these choice of words either, consolidate, broaden, and modernize the current land uses. I would prefer to have a set of words there like a complete or an overhaul of the current uses and permissions in alignment with concerns of the Board of Supervisors and Planning Commission that will strengthen and fortify the current land uses and protect them. I think that's a poor choice of wording on their part. I agree 100%.
Who knows, I mean, what
Well,
it
they
really
were,
means.
I believe they were taking their lead from the Board of Supervisors who tasked Art and I to go through this use matrix and try to sort it out, where you've got things like monasteries and other uses that just aren't applicable here.
Yeah.
And so why are they in here? And you've got some uses that, for things that probably just don't exist anymore.
We should try to recruit some monasteries.
Maybe, So, do we want to permit dance halls differently than a skating rink? I mean, yes, this table's been here for a long time, but, and if we want to keep it the same, that's certainly the purview of the body. And then the linked issue is, most of these are not defined. Some are defined, and that's left to an applicant and the zoning administrator to pick up Webster's and try to agree on what it means. And if they don't, then ultimately you're in court. If you have a definition, then then you control it. And so if you want to decide what a dance hall is and isn't, you can. But if you don't, then you're subject to debate, like kennels. Like, what is a kennel?
Yeah.
You've got this bizarre definition of what a kennel is, and then you're bound by that bizarre definition. And we can do that forever if we want to, but we don't have to.
So some of the questions that I think I'm hearing, Mr. Sis, did you have any?
I'm just, everybody said the same stuff, pretty much. I agree with Mr. Henry, it's not broken, go and fix it. We're a county of 8,000 people. Quite frankly, the ability to get all these different task force working groups and different input, I think is going to be monumental. I'm not saying it can't be done, I mean, there's always a chance. But I look at this, and I know it's a poor analogy, but I look at this as an airplane. I mean, the first airplane was a glider, and then they went to a biplane, and then went to something a little bit faster, and then went to a jet, then went to hypersonic. I don't think we can go from basically where we're at to what the Berkeley group wants to incorporate, what I've read that they want to incorporate. I'm all for them kind of checking over what we're doing to make sure that we're tracking, and certainly with a Commonwealth attorney, make sure we're legally, bound and everything. But I don't care how many definitions you put into something. There's always going to be somebody that has their own version of the truth or of their own version of that definition, and it's still going to wind up. I think, again, the more intricate you make this, it could be a trap in a lot of respects. The old adage, the more bends you put in the plumbing, the easier it is to spring a leak. I think keep it simple and build on it. Now, obviously, if we need to redo it at a later time or address a certain issue, we have to do it. But I don't think you're going to incorporate everything given the time and given what we're trying to accomplish. That's my take.
So with that in mind, do we want to give the Berkeley group back specific requests to simplify or recommendations to simplify? Or do we want to ask them for recommendations to how to simplify?
I think we're going into this with our eyes wide open. And we need a driver, and I don't think it's fair to look to Michelle or to the county administrator to be the driver on this. And we can't be the driver either, because we tried to be the driver on the comprehensive plan, and, you know, it took us a long time to get that document. So I think we need somebody to guide us, and, you know, it's kind of like building a building. You know, we can be the architects, we know what we want, we know what we're headed for, but, you know, you go out and get schematics for the plumbing and the heating, or you get a drafts person to do something. I think we're looking for a drafts person to help us to put together the structure that we want. So, you know, I think we basically start this process and say, you know, there's things we need to address, but the real true essence of the ordinance, the core things, you know, we're not looking to change those. You know, we're not looking to change the, you know, the density and a lot of the stuff in the ag, which really makes the county, you know, will we have a lot of input on the Sperryville area, you know, the village of Sperryville? Yeah, I think we'll have a lot to address there, particularly from the people. But we're in control. I mean, we and the board of supervisors have the final yes or no say. So I think we're aware of it. We don't need to be afraid of it. I think we can control it. And we just have to decide the path and the things. And I don't know the whole framework of what we need to really look at right now. So, you know, it's a little bit of fear that we have, but, you know, we're in control.
Good point.
Sounds to me that there's the most comfort in the process, organization, and perhaps the Berkeley group can build confidence and trust by doing solely that part, without changing uses and different, you know, things like that. So maybe they can break a scope out that tries to do that as a first step, and then you gauge how that goes and decide, well, are there following steps after that that move away from the just reorganizing and setting up, but make sure we have the best public hearing process there is, that you get into the use matrix and start talking about dance halls and this and that and the definition and making sure you align what you want, where you want. That's a separate follow-on discussion that you only enter into after you have that comfort level with their ability to follow directions on the first part.
That seems like a very reasonable statement. To me, the things that this sort of leading with a general community survey and the focus groups and, I mean, workshops, public comment forums, having an organized way to get public input is one thing, but to, you know, to start out in a broad way with things like surveys that are so driven by how things are worded and, you know, and the kind of things. That's the sort of stuff that just scares me right out of the box.
Well, let's face it, we have a pretty good general community survey. Probably the only good general community survey was conducted in Rappahannock County, 7 years ago by the Foothills Forum. It was a numbered survey that was mailed out of the University of Virginia and tabulated independently by them. And they had very few unnumbered responses, so it was all legitimate returns. And the end result of all that work was that people really didn't want to change anything, and they just wanted a little better cell phone and internet access, which, you know, probably anyone could have told us if we had just had coffee with them. So you know, that was a lot of money, and we didn't really learn anything we didn't already know, and we don't, thankfully, have you know, complaints about the way the county looks or the way the county is headed. So I don't know that there is a hue and cry for a general community survey. Project webpage, the county has a webpage, we could put information on there. Focus groups, again, I echo the concerns that the vocal minority can hijack those, and you can end up somewhere that you didn't intend to go at all. And let's face it, we're here every month, third Wednesday of the month. If you have something that's an idea, please just come see us. We're always here. Community workshops, Again, we're always here and open for public comment. Comment forms, there's always a way to give feedback through the webpage, and meetings and open houses will evolve naturally as part of the process. So I do think that we can greatly simplify, but still engage and inform like we should, but not go overboard.
Yeah, I think the concern, and I'm sorry if I'm beating this too much, but, the concern about this, and we faced this with the past review, we see this as our engagement with the Berkeley group. They're on a fixed budget. They will be naturally inclined to want to go and do what they do and bring us sort of products back. That's kind of how it works. They go work, they bring work products to us. That's an awkward situation here, and it tends to lead to big steps between engagement and redirect. And to me, one of the things that's key to this is sort of the more regular check-in mid-course correction, so that we don't end up getting something back that is sort of took a turn somewhere that we didn't notice until it was too late.
Well, I think Mr. Curry's suggestion was a good one, take a piece. Basically the reorganizing piece and see what they do.
Sounds like a plan. Gary, what do you need from us tonight?
I think I've heard enough to reach back out to them, explain to them the discussion, they can watch the discussion, and then see if they can come back with a, phase 1A, B, whatever, try to split that up to get us moving on something, the objective somethings really, rather than the subjective land use.
Yeah.
What makes Rappahannock Rappahannock, rather than this is the law you have to follow to get things done in an organized way.
So in anything you do, there are pros and cons, and in a bad proposal, there's good portions in a bad proposal. And the Berkeley group, they do this all the time. This is what they do 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week, and never how many people they have in their office. And they eat, sleep, and breathe this more than Mr. Curry and Michelle does. So they have valuable things to add, and then we just have to pick and choose and pull the stuff out, and just use what is appropriate to us, our community standards and style. So.
And be confident, and I have no doubt that this group would be confident to say, no, that's not us.
Yeah,
No
we say no.
photographs.
We say no. We never just don't say it awful enough. We say no.
Well, and I think last time they were very sensitive to our unique characteristics and who we are as a county, and that, what plays in other places doesn't play in Rappahannock. And I know that was different personalities. That was Darren, I think, who's moved up in the company, and now we have Rebecca, and I can't remember the other gentleman assigned to us.
Kelly Davis has moved on from the company, but Rebecca Cobb, who was here, and
I thought she was great.
Rebecca.
I thought she was really great. I think she really gets it.
And she's our lead, so.
Oh, yeah, great.
So good. Okay, so if you'll follow up with them, we will revisit that next month, and hopefully they'll have some revisions for us. And the other item of old business for this evening is the zoning ordinance amendment regarding vehicle access for events, direction from the board of supervisors. I did take this back to the board, and they did ask us to bring recommendation back to them in the next 100 days, along with the wording that we had worked through previously. I'm not sure if y'all have any feelings on that tonight, or...
I had a question about it. I'm trying to find it. I was curious as to why the frontage part was put into that. I was kind of confused about why that was included. The reference to section 170-24.
Yeah, the add paragraph 2.
In all zoning districts, for access to any traffic event impeding safe access, private streets, roads, and travelways or lanes shall be maintained in such a way that vehicles may, okay, that's not it. Where the heck is it?
Yeah, so the change really is just two things, adding a definition of what a traffic event impacting safe access is, as a thing, right? And then regulating how you handle that thing and where that thing can happen. And that's done in 17024, an existing section that was frontage or approved access required. So it's modifying what is already in the ordinance for frontage or approved access required and adding a subsection to the next paragraph to that, saying there are some special provisions for access in certain circumstances. And those certain circumstances, if you happen to have a traffic event impacting safe access, then you need to provide a certain type of access, and that is one that allows vehicles to pass. I think a reasonable modification to this would be to clarify that it doesn't necessarily have to be a two-lane road. It could be two single-lane roads, an in and an out, right? And we have a lot of field-type events that might be able to meet that, but not, right next to each other.
But they're not on all-weather surface.
Well, gravel is all-weather surface, and
It is?
yeah,
Okay, great.
and that could be fine-tuned if there's a thought that it's not clear enough. This body received AG opinion recently relative to short-term rentals. Between that and what is already allowed by the state, or mandated by the state, or we're out of the conversation by the state for agritourism, there's just certain things you can't regulate.
Right.
But this is a way to try to enhance the safety at events that tend to see many cars gathered at one time. And the question before the public, the Planning Commission, the Board of Supervisors, is it okay for many cars to gather at one time down a single lane road? Is that safe? And the Board of Supervisors is suggesting it's not safe. And that it's reasonable to put in place land use law to restrict that. And say that if you're going to have an event that attracts and has 25, or insert your number here, vehicles at one time on at that location, over that certain number, you can't do that on a single lane road. You've got to be able to provide two-way access so that when something bad happens at that event, fire, lightning storm, whatever it is, and those cars stream out of that site, just when you need life safety, emergency responders to get there, they can't get there because the road is plugged with cars leaving.
So this would apply to the driveway that leads from a main road all the way back to where this event's happening.
Well, and that's so, that all happened, yes, unless the definition would suggest that it doesn't apply to, the driveway only, serving only one residence or something like that, right?
Or for a family reunion, or,
Well,
to me, we discussed this and all the potential unintended consequences a whole lot. And what we didn't do is come up with language that could avoid them. And it seems like that is the task now before us, because I take some exception with the idea that we didn't act. We found this to be very troubling in its current form. And, I understand the request that, it's like, well, if you don't do anything, we're just gonna go ahead with it. Well, that may be okay, but that doesn't make what's here any less problematic for all the reasons we've already discussed. So it sounds like what the ask is, and maybe what we should try to do is, have, I don't know, a dedicated time in a meeting, or have a work session, or maybe we can all go off and attempt to mark up this language in a way that we think addresses many of these concerns about different types of events, what the right number is, and how it applies to a gate that opens into a field, and what constitutes an all-weather surface, and all of these things, and see what we come up with. But, to me, this is another one of these things where the idea that we haven't done anything just because this is troubling in its current form is sort of unfair.
If the board,
I just want to know.
if the board is responsible for writing this and sending it to us, then this is what the board wants.
I think this is the default that the board is going to consider if they don't get something better from this group. And so,
We should try.
yeah, and now, I would argue that safety doesn't care whether it's a family reunion or it's a winery event. And so, maybe the question is the threshold value of vehicles. I don't know. Or it's the length of a road or something like that. But we don't want a family to be wiped out any more than we want customers at a winery to be wiped out. It doesn't matter. And this is about safety. And if you're going to pass legal muster, the county attorney's perspective is that you have to apply this evenly among all types of events. Otherwise, you're just not going to be able to apply it to those agritourism events.
And I had some questions about that too, and I did bring up, for instance, sunrise service on Red Oak Mountain on Easter morning. I mean, I'm almost certain that draws more than 25 cars. And that's certainly a very narrow road. So what happens to events like that that are part of the fabric of the county that may not qualify? And I didn't really get a good answer from my peers on the board. I mean, I do understand that there are concerns now evolving at the state level that are precipitating our further consideration of this language. I don't know, again, and someone brought up, well, you can have like a driveway in and a driveway out. Well, if you have a big enough emergency, your driveway in will become your driveway out also. There will not be any dedicated driveway in. I was stuck in a parking garage on 9/11. The rules of the road don't matter.
Yeah.
Everybody will be going for their lives if it's a true emergency. So I don't think that that's a good idea either. I think if we do this, it needs to be that they must pass each other on the all-weather surface, not on an all-weather surface. It's a shared all-weather surface that they have to be able to pass each other on.
I know. So I think about the various hunts that we have, the races in the spring. And I think about the road into Bienvenue and whenever they have them down at the Stewart Field on 522. And I don't think, particularly Bienvenue, I don't think there's rooms for two vehicles to pass it. Anytime somebody's coming one way or the other, one of them has to stop and wait. So there's a situation right there where you have an event that there has to be substantial changes to the site to allow that.
And what's the safety issue? That's what I keep coming back to. I mean,
Yeah.
it seems like, part of what we're trying to get to here is sort of a fire and rescue situation. But when you're talking about this sort of outdoor dispersed event, to me, I don't see the public safety concern. And maybe that's the way we can kind of make this more tractable, is to focus on the, should this really be limited to indoor events, for example? I don't know if that was discussed, but it doesn't seem like it doesn't seem like every time 25 cars gather somewhere, it's a public safety event.
Well, I think that the concern is, can you get an ambulance into the site? And maybe not a fire truck in all instances, but if something were to go wrong, can you get an ambulance in? I think probably a lot of these events like the hunt, there's enough open land that, you can probably drive on the grass if the weather conditions have been right.
But that's not what you're saying in this.
But that's not what this is saying. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm saying I do think this language is problematic. I'm just not sure how we make it any better.
Well, I do think with respect to the idea of a family or a private event of some sort, there is, maybe it's not the safety being any different, but there's certainly a more informed participation and a more informed risk for somebody going to an event than when it's an event that is, appealing to the public. And therefore, the people who are coming may not realize that they are putting themselves in some risk. So maybe that is a way to get to the legal question here, because I think if we are trying to find one size fits all, I know I personally will always find this to be a solution that is worse than the underlying problem.
What about saying something like, a location where there are multiple traffic events in a single year or something? I mean, if what we're trying to get at is, people.
Art and I talked about even at Benvenue, the 4th of July. You can imagine all sorts of bad things happening there, but they have fire and rescue on site. Maybe, that is a carve out, and I think you've talked about that in some of your past meetings. If you're gonna have the hunt or whatever, and there's an ambulance there, then maybe that's a carve out, or law enforcement or something.
But if you got fire and rescue there, they gotta get out.
They gotta get out, but at least they're going with traffic, everybody else, right? Getting out, I don't know. Or law enforcement is there to direct traffic, or get out, and it's not easy. You have no ability to regulate many of these things, and should you, from a public safety perspective, do what you can.
So how was this created? Did the fire chiefs and the rescue squad come to the board and say, we have a problem? We have a problem that we're concerned about, and we need to be proactive to address the situation? Or did the board or somebody wake up one day and say, you know what, this would be a good idea, we need to do this?
No, none of the above.
None of the above.
It was a realization that you have agritourism facilities located on inadequate access roads that you have no control over and can overwhelm the system, and we're waiting for a bad thing to happen.
Well, and I'm sorry, I feel like I've been real negative, tonight, but
It's okay.
I think we could try to, if we have some kind of, one of the options that I described earlier, to try to do something with this that addresses some of these concerns. I don't know that we can get there, but if obviously there's a real interest in having us take another stab at this, and I want to be respectful of that request, and maybe we should have a work session or something where we just hash it out or we divide it up.
I think it would be useful to have a work session, but I don't know that I really have insight as to what we can legally carve out that would make this palatable.
Well, I don't think we try to address the legal. I think we try to address what's here and all of the things that seem apparent to us as potential shortcomings or unintended consequences. And from a planning perspective, that seems to me to be our role in this. And then, if what we come up with doesn't, survive legal concern, then we get a reaction to that. But as it stands, we've just been staring at this one piece of paper now, and we're not, we can see a lot of the challenges, but we're kind of stuck. And I have a whole, feeling like, the May amendments all over again kind of thing, and I want to avoid that.
I understand, that's why I took it back to the board and gave how interested they are in getting a result.
How many pages do we got to deal with here? It's not that many.
You got 2 paragraphs.
So why don't we just hit it next month, give it our best shot, and then we send it back to the BOS. And they ask us to do something within 100 days, start the day, hit it next month, and what we do is what we do. And we send it to them.
I would be happy to.
There's 2 pages.
Do my 2 cents, and maybe we bring that all together and have a group writing session of some sort.
I told the board I was confident we would be able to get it completed and back to them in 100 days.
We're gonna send them something back. I don't know whether they want anything back other than what they've done already.
Well, if that were the case, then presumably they wouldn't be sending it back.
Michelle, how are our agenda looking for next month? Can you tell, do we have a lot coming up?
We should be okay.
So we'll just plan on, now that we've all got this on our radar, going ahead and getting this wordsmithed and worked out next month. Do you all have anything to add on
I
it?
like my multiple event ideas. Most of the things you think of is a single, even Ben Venue, what is it, 2 or 3 times a year?
Well, and I mean, that may be one way to look at it too, because the field parties, which I think people theoretically come and get a permit for anyway.
Unless it's an agricultural thing, which is kind of by right.
So that might not be a way to get to it. I don't know.
So the fireworks gets a permit, but the horse races don't.
So we got that crazy thing in the ordinance where you can do one thing every 3 years, whatever the hell you want.
Yeah. The field party event thing.
Yeah, Woodstock, you can go
You
Woodstock.
can do it, she can approve it administratively once every 3 years.
Right.
Any more than that, they gotta go through the special
Right.
exception gauntlet.
So, would this new thing apply to that?
This would, doing this would essentially constrain special exceptions, any other permit would have to meet this requirement. You wouldn't be able to approve it, right? So if someone came to you with a plan, I'm gonna hold this great event, it's gonna have 1,000 cars, and I got this narrow road, you would not be able to approve that. They would have to at least meet whatever's in this ordinance.
But to Mr. Henry's point, even those events that are allowed by right 1 every 3 years would still be subject to this
Yeah,
rule.
it would just be administratively
So it would just
reviewed.
be administrative.
And Michelle would say, that's a great plan, except for you can't have more than 25 cars, so you need a bigger.
All right, so we'll get that, give that our thoughtful consideration for next month. List of direction for zoning ordinances from the Board of Supervisors. I don't think there's anything new there. And then next regular meeting is March. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Hey, one more thing.
Yes, sir.
So last month, we had a discussion, and I don't know, Michelle, about the B&B, Airbnbs in the county, tourist homes we've been approving, how many we approved and all that. And I asked the Commissioner of Revenue to do some work on that.
Yeah.
And apparently there's 35 active people right now in the county that's doing all these ones we approved.
Those were great stats.
Yeah, so it looks like people get this, do it for a while, and then they quit. And the music goes back to where it was.
Do y'all like having a minute to talk at the end of the meeting? Should we have round table discussion?
Did I do something wrong?
No, I just, I love round table discussion too, and it's not on the agenda,
No,
so
I mean, it's one nice thing.
I always enjoy hearing.
I like it
everybody.
too. Yeah. I like to say something.
Well,
Also.
sometimes it gives us a minute to talk about things that are happening in our districts that maybe not everybody's aware of.
I think our time would be better spent trying to draft a letter, help the Board of Supervisors draft a letter to seek some relief from the Commonwealth in helping us preserve our agricultural lands and keep them from turning into commercial enterprises all over the place. You know, they keep loosening them as opposed to, no restrictions is starting to drive me a little nuts.
It does seem to be a
I
losing
mean,
battle
yeah,
sometimes.
on anywhere you can drink.
And the last one upset me a bit.
Yeah.
Which one was that?
Understandably so.
Airbnbs.
Oh, yeah.
There was a bill last year with a reenactment clause. This year I think to go back and look at it relative to agritourism uses. From a building code perspective, as you're aware, if it's agritourism use, you just don't have to follow a building code, which is crazy. But what this was, it tried to kind of split the middle and say that you don't have to follow the building code, but you do have to follow these 8 things, like exit signs and a few other things. That was approved passed last year with a reenactment clause this year, so it has to pass 2 years in a row. I'll have to dig up and see if it went anywhere this year.
So do we want to send a recommendation up to the board?
Not yet.
Okay. All right, motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? All in favor?
Session here too.
So,